Hey everybody, Julie Youngblood here with Youngblood Coaching and Consulting, and today what I'm going to give you is a little piece of my listing presentation called the CAPE method. Now, it's called the CAPE method so that it's easy for you to remember. I don't want you running around telling your potential clients, hey, I'm going to do the CAPE method. It's just an easy spelling so that you can do this presentation anywhere, anytime, any place, and the good news is, if done accurately, the goal is to enroll the seller on your team, on your real estate team. They really get to see with this procedure and with this method how they are a big part of the decision-making process and how they are a big part of what you expose to the masses with regards to their property. So we're going to start with the first letter. Now I literally do this on a blank sheet of paper when I'm in front of the clients. I draw a big X on the paper or a big plus sign. And the first thing I do is C. Now, Mr. Seller, what the C stands for is condition. And when we talk about condition, what we're talking about is how does the home show? When people pull up to the front yard, is the grass trimmed? Is the door clean? When people walk in, how does it smell? Are the dishes done? Are the beds made? We're talking about this home looking like a model when people walk in. Now, Mr. Seller, based on that description of condition, who would you say is in charge of making sure that this home is in the absolute best condition for the showings we're going to get? And your job at that point is to shut up and listen. And if you've described it properly, the seller will say, well, I'm in charge of condition. And you will write, that's right, Mr. Seller. Now, if you practice your scripts enough, you might actually say things like, Mr. Seller, be careful. I've done that before. Now, I will tell you, common mistake for people learning the CAPE method is that when we get to condition, they actually start to stage the seller's home. That's not what we're doing here. We're simply explaining what it is and determining whose job it is to make sure that it's in the best condition. If there are things that need to be done, you'll do those things with the seller after you get the listing contract signed. What you don't want to do is go over these 4 items and then give them everything they need to sell it themselves. I've seen it happen and I don't want that to happen to you. So describe condition in a way that makes sense. Ask the question, Mr. Seller, who's in charge of making sure this home is in great condition? And they'll answer, me. Now, Mr. Seller, the next thing that's super important when selling your home is access. Now, what access talks about is how easy is it for agents to come into the property with their qualified buyers. Fortunately, I've got a great tool called a lockbox. We're going to put that on the door, and when agents are ready, they're going to come in using this lockbox key, and they're going to access the property. Now, Mr. Seller, ultimately, whose job is it to make sure that it's absolutely easy for buyers and their agents to get into the home? Ideally, they'll say, me, the seller. If for whatever reason there is a hiccup with having a lockbox on the door, this is where you're going to know it. They may let you know, well, I'm really concerned about having a lockbox, and at that point you get to overcome the objection with how it's safe to have a lockbox on the door, and only realtors have access to those. And I know in the Las Vegas market, I just let my sellers know, unfortunately, we went through a time frame where it was so easy to show homes. Most of them were vacant, and so if there are too many hoops to jump through for any buyer or agent, they may actually end up pushing your home to the side because it's just not easy to show. And we do want people coming through the home, right, Mr. Seller? And they're going to say, of course. So ultimately, whose job is it to make sure that it's absolutely easy to get into your home? And they'll say, well, me, right? And you'll write, that's right, the seller. Now, the third most important thing that it takes to get your home sold is price. Now, Mr. Seller, the good news is I'm going to give you the information as to what's going on in the market. However, ultimately, who's going to determine what we list this home for? Now, you will inevitably get the question, well, aren't you going to tell me what it's worth? Well, what do you think it's worth? Well, the last agent told me that this is what they thought it was worth. And this is how I overcome that objection. I will tell you, my best conversations happen around price because I never tell a seller what to list their home at. Now, some realtors out there think I'm absolutely berserk and that my job is to advise on price. My job is to advise on the market to help the seller make an educated decision about price. So here's what I ask my sellers. I say, Mr. Seller, let me ask you this. Let's pretend like we've gone over the comps, and the comps show that the home is worth $250,000. And I say to you, why don't we list it at $225,000? What are you going to say? And obviously they're going to say, well, why would I list it lower? And I'm going to say, right, who's in charge of the list price, me or you? And they will always answer that it's them, because that is the truth. The seller decides what we list the home at. Depending on my education and how I present the market will help them make the best decision. So ultimately, Mr. Seller, who's in charge of making sure that we price the home in the market so that we can get multiple offers? And they're going to say, well, I am, right? The seller. Now, Mr. Seller, the fourth most important thing is exposure. That's the E of CAPE, right? Exposure. Now, when I talk about exposure, I'm talking about making sure that everybody knows that this home is for sale. I'm talking about marketing. I'm talking about networking. I'm talking about all of the things that go into making sure your home is very well marketed. And Mr. Seller, who's in charge of making sure that this home is exposed to the masses? And that is the one where the seller gets to say, well, you are, right? The agent. Absolutely. And who's in charge of making sure that they choose me today to market their home? At that point, I like to do what's called the wrap-up. So when I do the wrap-up, I want to go over everything briefly again so that I can set the stage for any uncomfortable conversations that may happen in the future should the seller decide to overlist the home, not put a lockbox, or show the home in poor condition. So the wrap-up goes like this. So Mr. Seller, as you can see, these are the four most important things that it takes to really pay attention to when selling your home. And you'll notice that you're actually in charge of 3 of the 4. Do you see how you and I are going to really work together on this? And they're usually, they're nodding their head with you and they're pretty excited about it as well. Now here's what I'll tell you, Mr. Seller, and here's what most agents won't tell you. I'm going to expose whatever you give me, right? So if you give me a home that's hard to see, that's exactly what I'm going to expose. If you give me a home in poor condition, that's exactly what I will expose. And if you give me a home that's overpriced, I will expose an overpriced home. So is it fair to say that if I'm having a problem in any one of these areas, that I give you a call because, as we've determined here, you are absolutely in charge of those 3 aspects? This is how I open the door if the seller does decide to overprice it. We can have that conversation. Or if we're having a problem with, the yellow carpet with the dog poo on it, yes, that stuff has happened before, I can have that conversation. And then I always end it with this. And Mr. Seller, I believe in open communication, and I want to know that if at any time you feel like I haven't done my job to expose the property, that you'll pick up the phone and call me so we can have that conversation. And that's the CAPE method. That's the wrap-up. At that point, what we'll do is we'll go into the exposure part, which is our marketing plan. And so that'll be another segment, and I hope you choose to watch it. I hope that the CAPE method has been helpful for you. As always, check out my website, julieyoungblood.com, or give me a call if you have any questions, 702-234-8181.